So I do want to say a couple thank yous to a few people, actually. So I want to say thank you to our morning speaker, Tanner Gears, for such a moving talk. And I also want to thank the Dermatones and Soyeya for their amazing performances. And I really want to say special thanks to my MLK committee. Without you, we couldn't have gotten this off the ground. And the enthusiasm and the motivation and the awesome meetings, thank you guys for that. And so in honor of this year's Geisel MLK committee celebration, our theme is Inaccessible America, advocating for difference in race and abilities. And so with that, it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Feranmi Okanlami as our keynote speaker. Dr. Okanlami wears many hats on top of being a family medicine physician. He is also the assistant professor at the University of Michigan School of Medicine. He's the faculty lead for medical student success in the Office of Health Equity and Inclusion. And he is the chief medical director for the Guardian Life Insurance Company. So I am personally thankful for having the opportunity to introduce Dr. Okanlami because, like many of us in this room, I am aspiring to become a physician one day. And sometimes that entails a lot of work, a lot of hard work. And day in and day out, I keep thinking, why am I doing this? This is just really challenging. But I can only imagine what Dr. Okanlami had to face when following his diving accident during his residency program. And many people think that would have been the end of his journey, but he persisted. His resilient character brought him back to medicine, back to doing what he loved, and most importantly, brought him to the forefront for advocating for his patients and his community. So his story inspires me to continue doing this challenging work, to keep pushing forward, and to keep advocating for my future patients and for my community. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Feranmi Okanlami.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Geisel. Thank you guys for having me today. First of all, this is going to be a fun environment, okay? So I don't want us to be all stuffy. I know I'm up here in a suit, but that's just because I like to dress nice. But I want you guys to be really, really relaxed during this talk, okay? So I admitted to Valerie earlier to try to set her at ease because she was a little bit nervous. She said this was her first time speaking, so please give her another round of applause because she did a wonderful job. But I have no excuse because this is not my first time speaking, and I'm super nervous for some reason. So you guys should all be very, very excited that I'm super nervous up here, and you can take notes on how many times I mess up and flub things. But really, I appreciate being here with you guys, and I'm looking forward to being able to chat with you afterwards as well. It's good to see some familiar faces. I just saw a Michigander walk in the room. I didn't know she was here, so that's exciting to see her. And I had a wonderful time with Sean O'Leary last night at dinner. So really, it's humbling and flattering to be here with you guys. Okay. So as you know, my name is Feranmi Okanlami, and I have been an African, a Nigerian, since I was born. An African American since my family immigrated to the States when I was 2 years old, and an African American man with a disability ever since a diving accident on July 4th of 2013 when I was an orthopedic surgery resident at Yale. That left me paralyzed from my chest down. I'm here today with you to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. As a person with a disability, I'm here to claim that legacy on behalf of yet another long marginalized group seeking our rightful place and full equality in American life. Dr. King's success for African Americans has provided a model for so many people and other movements, for women, for the LGBT community, and for people with disabilities. It succeeds because its foundation is the real exceptional reality in this nation. It was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all are created equal. I am the son of two physicians who first trained in Nigeria before moving to the United States to further their medical education and training, eventually establishing their practices in South Bend, Indiana. I went to the Stanley Clark School, a terrific private school in South Bend, where I was one of only a few black students in the entire preschool through 8th grade. But at that time, I did not appreciate any significant difference in how I was treated solely based on my race. In fact, in 8th grade, I wrote, "My school is a safe place where no one really cares the color of the skin or the way you wear your hair. I went on to Deerfield Academy for high school, a prestigious college prep boarding school in Western Mass. Ironically, our colors are green and white, and we have a big block D that looks very familiar to what you guys wear around here. But it was there for the first time I began to realize that some viewed my difference as inferior. I had been in the talented and gifted program in my public elementary school. I started attending private school in 4th grade, and I was the son of 2 physicians. Yet I was surrounded by such a level of wealth and privilege that often felt me leaving feeling like a second-class citizen. Years later, I recall having a conversation with my parents about their own experiences when they first realized that merely working hard and treating others well did not always result in being treated the same. They shared stories of the time when they were both repeating residency in the States after having already done so in Nigeria, and not being able to recognize when they were being blatantly discriminated against, because the notion that someone would treat them differently because of the color of their skin was a foreign notion to them. It was in those 4 years that I realized being Black meant I was supposed to look, sound, dress, act, and feel a certain way. Up to that point, I felt like I'd been judged by the content of my character. But it was then that I realized that too often it was by the color of my skin. I'm a first-generation African American, with no direct family links to the long legacy of slavery and segregation. Yet I too have experienced discrimination because of my race, like virtually every other Black man in this nation. From street sweepers to senators, Ivy League professors to professional football players. The quest for human equality, for African Americans, for people with disabilities, and anyone else, is an ongoing evolution, not a race with a finish line. Full participation for African Americans was not achieved by the martyrdom of Dr. King or the election of Barack Obama. Full participation for LGBT people was not achieved with same-sex marriage. And full participation for people with disabilities was not achieved by the Americans with Disabilities Act. As important as all of these milestones are, the price of equality, like liberty, is eternal vigilance. On a tilted playing field, any minority must excel by orders of magnitude in order to be recognized as equal. While that is a glaring injustice, it is an unfortunate reality. Recognizing this drove me to achieve the highest levels of excellence I could in the classroom, in the social and cultural life of my institutions, and on the athletic teams I played on. As I wrote in Kaleidoscope, the Deerfield Black Student Coalition's journal, as a junior in high school, I like listening to Dave Matthews, and most of my friends are white. That doesn't mean their whiteness has brushed off on me, that maybe I don't realize I'm Black. The scary part is that more often than not, when someone calls me white, they feel as if they're paying me a compliment. This only goes to show that some people, white and Black, feel that Blacks are not capable of doing some of the things that I aspire to do simply because they wanted to. The fact that I had high aspirations for myself is merely a reflection of my character, not a reflection of my skin color. At Stanford University, among other things, I set out to excel on the track team, stretching my triple jump personal best from a pedestrian sub-47-foot mark to almost 52 feet. By my junior year, I was elected team captain, broke Stanford's indoor school record, and was among the nation's top 15 jumpers, college and professional athletes included. I was all-conference, all-region, all-American. And at Stanford, as at Deerfield, I forged my identity in the space between the Black and white communities, never feeling fully accepted by many on both sides. I was too much of a nerd for the jocks, but I was too much of a jock for the nerds. I looked too Black for the white people, but I acted too white for the Black people. My Nigerian name was too difficult for the Americans, but my American accent when speaking my native tongue was a source of laughter to many Nigerians. I successfully ran for president of the sophomore class on a slate with 3 others, a Black woman athlete, a Jewish man, and a white woman. In the process, we defeated a majority Black slate, but it was made quite clear that we had not won the Black vote. I must admit that at times I felt a bit of, you're either for us or against us within the Stanford Black community. And I certainly did not feel as though I was considered to be entirely with them. Even in the mid-2000s, issues of race surfaced on campus, particularly around Stanford's ethnic-themed dorms, which I just found out you have something similar here. Even though there were only 50% of the designated theme, whether that's Black, Native American, Hispanic, or Asian American. The Black Community Services Center was referred to as the Black House, occasionally drawing accusations of reverse racism by the majority population. I cannot tell you how many times conversations started with comments like this. How would you feel if we had dorms that were mostly white people? How would you feel if we had a building called the White House, where white people get together and do things to help each other? Sometimes all I could do was that, and laugh at sometimes the painful irony of the statements that were made, and the irony that was almost always lost on the people that were making them. I eventually made it to the University of Michigan Medical School, where I continued my approach to excelling in academics, sports, social interactions, and in service. But one experience especially stands out in the context of our observance here today. My first surgical rotation as a third-year medical student. Now, I know that most of you are pre-meds or first and second-year medical students, and so you may not have this entire experience yet, but keep this in mind, and I'm sure it'll ring a bell in a few years. As an aspiring surgeon at the time, I wanted to make sure that I hit the ground running. So I contacted the chief of the service before the rotation began to ask him what I could do to prepare. He suggested that on day one, I show up for rounds before our official orientation in order to meet the team and be dismissed. Thinking I was going the extra mile, I decided to call the intern to see how they prepared for rounds in order to know what would be expected of us the following day. He offered to meet me a few minutes before he was going to pre-round so I could watch what he does. In an effort to not come across as an undercover gunner, I also called my classmates who were on the rotation and offered to invite them to join me, and one decided to come along. The intern was late. After several minutes of attempting to reach him to no avail, he finally called me and told me to print the list and get the numbers. Luckily, at this point, I had been on other inpatient rotations, and I knew the basics of what he was requesting. So my classmate and I divided up the list and got the numbers. When the intern finally showed up, there was not much time before rounds were to begin. As it turns out, there was a very specific cover sheet that was supposed to go on top of the rounding list for that service. And the chief liked the paper to be stapled in a specific place in a certain fashion before we slid the rounding list under the chief's call room door at a certain time. Now, all of these details were woefully lacking in the list that we had. Before we had time to right all of our wrongs, the conference room door swung open, and the chief, a large, bald Kenyan man with a British accent, appeared in the room. "I start on time." And then he walked out. The intern hopped up without saying a word and followed him out into the hallway, so we all clearly did the same. When it was time to present the first patient, the intern slipped behind us, making it very clear that we were going to be the ones that were presenting the patients on rounds. Taken aback by this move, but feeling prepared to make an excellent first impression, I began. Mrs. Smith is a 36-year-old woman with no significant past medical history who's now post-op day 2, status post-parathyroidectomy. As I made my way through the presentation, reading her overnight events, vital signs, and lab results, I was thinking to myself, I got this. Before that feeling could fully sink in, the chief asks me, "What is the importance of the chem sticks?" Huh? I froze. Again, what is the importance of the chem sticks? Real talk, I had no idea what he was talking about. So then he turned to my classmate, "Gabriel, what is the importance of the chem sticks?" No response. He turns back to me. "Did you research your patient?" I'm thinking, my patient? This man's patient hiding behind me. I'm not even supposed to be here right now. So, no response once again. "Did you research your patient?" No. My thinking, How am I supposed to research a patient I didn't even know I was supposed to be seeing today, right? Is this your first clinical rotation? No. Do you have access to a computer? Yes. Well, then what is your excuse for not having researched your patient? I had no words. This process continued for the remainder of the patients on the service until we were finally dismissed. Later that week, I was scrubbing into a case next to that same chief when he growled, "Wars have been fought over water." Taking a quick second to even process what he just said, I realized that he had turned his water off when he scrubbed while mine was still running. I quickly shut off the water and thought, "Bruh, can I live? I can't even wash my hands right in front of you." A few days afterwards, the chief pulled me aside and explained the treatment. He could tell that I wanted to get ahead in the surgical rotation. He also knew that I needed to be 10 times better than anyone else to be considered half as good, something that he had experienced all too well during his progression from black student to black resident to one of the only black surgical chief residents. He was doing it because he knew that if I were to have any chance at being successful in that world, he would need to hold me to a higher standard. Was it unfair and unreasonable for him to expect that I would have known everything about all those patients on rounds that morning before even beginning the rotation? Absolutely. But he was teaching me that at times, even despite my best efforts, I will be told that I am wrong, I will not get the credit I deserve, and I'll be viewed as inferior to my peers. Therefore, the better I did, the harder it would be for anyone to find fault in my work. I lost my own physical independence on Independence Day, the day when Americans first declared that all are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was 2013, and I had just finished my second year of residency in orthopedics at Yale New Haven Hospital. Life was good. I was hosting a 4th of July gathering at my apartment complex's swimming pool when I dove into the pool. I don't know if I hit the bottom or the side or someone's leg, but when I finally floated up, I couldn't move. I was coughing and sputtering, helpless in the water. Luckily, a friend sitting on the pool deck saw me struggling, jumped into the pool, and pulled me out. It was immediately apparent to me and many of my friends that were there, including an assortment of surgical residents from various specialties, that I had likely suffered a cervical spine injury. Putting together our advanced trauma life support skills, they got me on my back, stabilized my C-spine, and called 911. It was my team's weekend to cover spine call. So a fellow PGY3 orthopedic resident had the unthinkable task of assessing me as I was rolled into the trauma bay. Apparently, my years of befriending everyone in the hospital, from president to janitors, paid off, because I was whisked from the trauma bay to imaging to the OR in record time and was on the operating room table in under 2 hours. Another friend of mine was the attending surgeon who performed my anterior cervical decompression infusion, my first of 3 surgeries. I had suffered a C6 teardrop fracture and initially was unable to feel or move anything from my chest down. I had very minimal use of my upper extremities as well. I had some difficulty breathing and mustering enough strength to cough, but I was lucky enough to never require intubation outside of the OR. In my attempts to describe spinal cord injuries to people, I sometimes describe a highway system. The further down from the brain that the accident occurs, the more exits to other parts of the body are accessible. So I could hold my head up, my shoulders and elbows worked, my lungs worked, but my diaphragm was initially too weak for deep breaths. I did not have the strength or dexterity in my hands and fingers to hold a pen or pick up a fork. I couldn't feel my legs or move anything below my chest. People often only think of motor and sensory losses when discussing paralysis. But I also lost control of my bowel and bladder, and I had no proprioceptive sense, which is your body's ability to discern its place in space. A few days after my second surgery in New Haven, I was airlifted to the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago on July 15th. On September 8th, alone in the shower, I moved my leg for the first time. When I was discharged from the inpatient therapy, I moved back to my parents' home in Indiana, which they'd remodeled to make it accessible for me. And I continued therapy as an outpatient. To keep exercising my mind as well as my body, I enrolled into a year master's program in engineering, science, and technology entrepreneurship at the University of Notre Dame, and was eventually invited to join the Memorial Hospital Family Medicine Residency Program, which I completed December of last year. Soon I'll join the departments of family medicine, physical medicine, and rehabilitation as an assistant professor at Michigan Medicine. I will be teaching residents and medical students, seeing patients in my own clinic, and developing a research plan for medical training and disability. I will also work with the Office for Health Equity and Inclusion, representing them on the Disability Council, mentoring underrepresented minority students and students with disabilities, as well as developing programs for their professional development, leadership, community building, wellness, and scholarship. This is just one step towards my goal of making the medical field more broadly accessible to people with disabilities, both patients and providers. The process of achieving equal access for people with disabilities runs parallel with the process of achieving equal access for people of color. And the issues are compounded in cases like mine, where the prejudices of racism and ableism converge. Like all prejudice, the discrimination begins with unfounded assumptions based on an individual's appearance or circumstances. A particular story has been burned into my memory. And before I tell it, I must admit to you that I need to pray for forgiveness, because how I felt in this scenario, two wrongs do not make a right. And despite the fact that I was hurt by what was said, the thoughts that came to my mind were certainly not ones I want any of you to emulate. But enough with the disclaimers. It was early on in my recovery, and I was still in inpatient rehab. That day, I was being introduced to adaptive sports, getting to roll around in different wheelchairs, try my hand at adaptive tennis, wheelchair rugby, etc. The therapist working with me that day began to explain how lineups and rosters were created based on an individual's level of ability. In order to prevent one team from playing all of their super high-functioning players at the same time, there had to be a mix of varying levels of ability on the court or field at the same time. As someone who would be classified as a quadriplegic, but who, even at that time with no motor function in my legs, had maintained some upper body strength, he was telling me how I would be a valuable addition to any team because I would be classified as rather low functioning, but I would be able to punch above my weight class, so to speak. That was all well and good, but I wondered how they factored in continued progress into that equation, and whether one could continue to play adaptive sports if they made a significant amount of progress. His initial answer was yes, to which I then asked, even if I get to be like you? It was his next words that I will never forget. Let's be honest, man, you're never going to be like me. I am now mature enough and calm enough to realize that he did not mean for that statement to come across the way that it did. But here's where my disclaimer kicked in. I looked at him, this man who had never been a Division I athlete at Stanford, had never been an All-American, two-time captain, and thought to myself, I will never be like you? Oh no, my friend, you will never be like me. That experience helped to shape the way that I speak with my patients, being careful not to offend or to break their spirits, while making sure not to make promises or guarantees that you cannot ensure. The cure for both societal ills, racism and ableism, as well as any other bias, involves both education and accommodation. Education of a person, their peers, and the population. Education starts with dispelling lies, misconceptions, and historical assumptions about the difference that marks the minority. No African Americans are not inherently dim-witted, shiftless, and criminal. No people with disabilities are not inherently slow, incompetent, and helpless. The best education is getting to know the other person as a person. As Dr. King said, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. The civil rights movement succeeded partly because the implementation of Brown versus Board, however delayed, allowed little white boys and girls to meet little black boys and girls in the classroom and on the playground. In spite of what they'd been taught at home, many of those children could see that the clear fundamental humanity of each other. They were normal human beings with normal hopes, desires, interests, activities, and goals. It was harder to hate, to mistreat, or to belittle. The same is true with people with disabilities, or as I like to call them, people. Accommodation involves providing the resources that empower a person to express their full and equal humanity. We do this all the times for ourselves without questioning it. How many people out there wear glasses or contacts? That is an accommodation. You have an eyesight disability, so you correct it. We want everyone to be able to see clearly so we can participate together in what is going on. And I do know that even as we're here today, that we have guests that continue to participate even if they cannot see what's going on. My crutches or my wheelchair are the same kind of thing for my own disability. Extra time taking a test is the same type of thing for students with learning disabilities. The American with Disabilities Act required curb cuts and ramps to remove barriers on the streets, and elevators and wide doors to welcome people into buildings. Providing necessary accommodations should not be seen as an unfair advantage or a burden to the remainder of society. Instead, it should be merely attempting to create a space where everyone can participate, regardless of their differences. I look forward to the day when accommodations are no longer seen as special and are just viewed as what it takes. As absurd as this analogy may sound, bear with me for a second. Imagine if urinals were considered the standard voiding receptacle. So every bathroom just has urinals in it. But then women spoke up and said, our anatomy is just a little different. And so while I guess I could use that, it would be great if you just gave us toilets. But instead of the response being, sure, that makes sense, people say, well, why do they have to use the bathroom in this building? Or can't they just go around to the other bathrooms? Or do you have any idea how expensive it's going to be to get rid of those urinals and put in toilets? We're all different. And therefore, it may require different things for each person to be successful. How we decide which of those differences are worth accounting for and which are not is currently a very imperfect system. I think we are all on a spectrum, and where you fall on that spectrum determines what type of modification you may or may not need. I have a hard time with describing someone based on what they cannot do. And that is exactly what we do. We assume that just because someone can't walk or hear or see, that they can't do the things that you previously assumed those activities were required for. Someone who can't walk may be able to do many other things much better than someone who can walk. But oftentimes those talents go unnoticed, or they're not given the opportunity to showcase them because people get stuck on what they're unable to do. On the other side of this same coin are the people with invisible disabilities, or at least ones that aren't readily seen by just looking at someone. Their own struggles are often overlooked. The person sitting next to me on the airplane may have been battling something that made it much harder for them to get out of bed this morning, yet no one thanks them for getting up and getting to work that day. My point here is not to say that we should not help those with physical disabilities or acknowledge the difficulties they may have in their day-to-day lives. Rather to say that if we treated everyone equally, understanding that you may not know what difficulties someone else faces unless you've been in their exact situation, we would create a world in which people are not offended by the words or actions of others, and everyone is given an opportunity to succeed. People often use the phrase, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And while on the surface that is a very good analogy, I challenge you all to take it a bit further and actually consider the path that that person is taking. You and I can travel down the same road, but it will be a very different journey for me than it will be for you. Small cracks and holes in that road that you may go unnoticed, walking over them with your shoes that cause you no trouble, may cause my wheels to get caught up and me to fall over. When it comes to racial discrimination, Where the disadvantages are not just physical or mental, but historical and systemic, other accommodations may be required. Universities sometimes recognize the special challenges of first-generation students, who are likely to be minorities, and provide the scholarships, mentorships, and support structures they need to succeed in education. Corporations recognize the special challenges of underrepresented groups, so they adjust their recruitment, training, and promotion policies to broaden the workforce. This is a very sensitive subject to many, and one that has often led to tense and uncomfortable conversations amongst people that I trusted and respected. Being here with you today actually provides an excellent backdrop for this point. As I walked through the halls, or rolled, of the Hanover Inn last night, I looked at pictures on the walls depicting the storied history of this prestigious college. And it was impossible to not miss the homogeneity of those images. I will be even more specific to drive the point home a bit better. If your family has had 3 generations of Dartmouth College graduates, the conversations had at the dinner table when you were in elementary school or high school about your future will inevitably be different than those whose same family members were not even allowed in that institution 3 generations before. To acknowledge that there is a difference there and that we must do something about it is by no means intended to take away from the hard work I'm sure many of those legacy families did to put people at Dartmouth year after year. But it is also not an excuse for lazy, underperforming minority groups that are looking for a handout. The concept of race in medicine is particularly complicated. Study after study has shown that minorities, particularly African Americans, at times receive less attention and less precise care from providers. And some medical schools have even started including curriculum on unconscious bias to attempt to avoid this problem. This mindset extends beyond differences in ability to the full range of diversity we encounter in humanity and in ourselves. Each of us is a composite of multiple communities. I represent Africans. I represent Nigerians. I represent African Americans. I represent men. I represent people with spinal cord injuries. I represent people of color. I represent physicians. Every time you leave a good impression with someone, that impacts others in a way you will never know. Someone will mention that wonderful woman physician, or that nice young Hispanic EMT, and then someone else's prejudices will weaken. When you represent the multiple demographics that you are, just by being yourself, you shed light that changes the world. This drive to broad diversity and inclusion has its own evolution, again parallel to the civil rights movement. In the beginning, it was driven by compliance with federal law, including the Supreme Court's outlawing public school segregation, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and President Johnson's executive order requiring non-discrimination by federal contractors. As society became more integrated, more and more leaders recognized inclusion as a moral imperative, or the right thing to do. Today, commercial and educational institutions are taking the lead with initiatives such as CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, because they recognize the benefits of inclusion for everyone, not just the minorities. Diverse classrooms enrich educational experience. Diverse corporate teams are more innovative. This was Dr. King's insight. Everyone is injured by discrimination, and everyone is elevated by inclusion. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He said, "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly. All life is interrelated, and all men are interdependent. The agony of the poor diminishes the rich, and the salvation of the poor enlarges the rich." He quoted Lincoln's grounds for emancipation. "In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve." This approach grounds action in the recognition of fundamental human equality that has distinguished America from Thomas Jefferson through Abraham Lincoln to Dr. King and down to our own day. I applaud your emphasis this year. Action against inaccessibility. Action against the system that makes it harder to walk, harder to run, and harder to fly for people of different races and abilities. The initial statement of purpose originally included the following as well. We must stand for those who cannot walk, listen for those who cannot hear, speak for those who cannot vocalize their needs. We will sacrifice our comfort and convenience because we all have the ability to advocate for patients with disabilities. I was pleased to see that for whatever reason, that last statement was excluded. Because as I prepared my talk, I was ready to give my opinion that the solution for people who can't see or walk or fly is not for someone else to do it for them. It's accommodation so their disability does not exclude them from the equal opportunity to participate fully in our national life. Dr. King did not call upon the nation to do things for African Americans. He called the nation to abandon its oppression and recognize their equality. No one is superior to lift up one who is inferior. We are equally human beings who benefit from each other's success and who deserve the tools to achieve our own. That approach preserves each person's full dignity and worth. The struggle for this equality is an ongoing challenge, and the arc of history bends towards justice, but it is long. There will be setbacks, and in many ways we are facing some in the nation today. As I dedicate my life to celebrating differences and demonstrating that difference does not mean less than, we are constantly reminded that not everyone holds those same beliefs. As the potential emerges for changes in immigration laws, threats to the ADA, and an overall culture of divisiveness, we must continue to do exactly what you are all doing here today. The path that Dr. King charted must be the route to equality for people with disabilities and any other excluded groups. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. One would hope that nearly 50 years after his martyrdom, the wisdom of his approach would be widely appreciated so that determinations of injustice would be sufficient for successful negotiation. Nevertheless, as he said, human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men and women willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally to the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively, in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. As an African-American man, I value the role that Dr. King played in the opportunities that have been opened to me, including the fact that I am sort of standing on this stage and speaking to you today. As an African-American man with a disability, I am committed to imitating his quest for equality, not just under the law, but in the society and in the hearts of my fellow citizens and human beings. As he said, it really boils down to this, once again. All life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly. My mission is to disabuse disability. I believe that is why we are all here this weekend. We recognize the power of Dr. King's approach for our own mission. And we work for the day when all people, no matter their color, their culture, or their disability together, will declare together, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Thank you.
We have some time for questions, comments, thoughts.
Hi, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
My question is, as being a medical student, seeing a lot of my peers that have disabilities, that might not be seen disabilities, but at the same time, I feel like I don't see a lot of fellow med students that have disabilities that you are able to see with the naked eye. So what are your thoughts on sort of being more inclusive in medicine to encourage students that have physical disabilities to still be able to complete a successful career in medicine?
So that is actually a very pertinent question to some of the work that we're trying to do at Michigan specifically. So technical standards exist for all medical schools, and those technical standards dictate how people get in and who doesn't. So I'm singling Michigan out because that's where I am. Other institutions are doing the same thing, but we've rewritten the technical standards for admission to medical school because they realized that those technical standards were, at that time, probably they're probably purposely doing this, but they inadvertently excluded people that didn't look, act, or seem a certain way. And so I think that we acknowledge that the practice of medicine is an intellectual exercise that requires certain physical skills, but that those physical skills can be accommodated for. And so the direct answer to your question is that I think it's going to take a changing tide to demonstrate that even if you're not the one that's able to perform the compressions when you're running a code, if you understand what needs to be done in running a code and you're able to direct people effectively, that should be just as important. And that's something that the interesting part and what happens in academia is that until something is written, until something is published, it doesn't really exist. And so we need to do our job to demonstrate that this is the case. So we can show that students with disabilities, the biggest issue is that people think that we're going to be unsafe. And so the first thing is to demonstrate that no patient care has been harmed by having individuals with disabilities present. And then we need to publish what it is that we're doing. We need to demonstrate essentially a gold standard that we're going to uphold people to. And then we need to show that that's what's going to happen. So I think that yes, people of all shapes, colors, sizes, races, abilities need to be encouraged to pursue medicine if they're interested in doing so. But we need to at least have a framework that supports them as they're going through that process. So.
This is good for me.
Actually, I raised my hand so Sean would have to run all the way. My question is, the research has recorded that there is a difference, even regardless of socioeconomic class, in the health care received by minorities than majorities. That's not my statement. Research has proven it. So as I think about minority, let's say myself, let's say in addition to taking into the hospital my race, let's say I took into that hospital also my race and a disability. So then there's an additional thing that is going to impact my treatment. Are medical schools in any way actively trying to train future physicians to deal with, first of all, the fact that that does exist, we're not making it up, and how do they overcome it and not give that different treatment to people based on race and disability?
So that is an excellent question. And as the day goes on, I may eventually sound like a broken record because I think that the cure for that exact thing is not one answer, right? It's a multiple step process that has to start from somewhere. One is doing what you said, acknowledging that we are not making that up, acknowledging that that exists. But what happens too often is that when you acknowledge that exists, there's this someone needs to be blamed phenomenon, where people are thinking that you're trying to assign blame to a certain person or certain group for creating that, right? And rather than being able to get to the solution, we are worried too much about ascribing blame, and people are saying, well, this isn't our fault, we didn't do that. At this point, this is just me, so this is Feranmi Okanlami speaking up on his own beliefs, not anything else right now. I don't care right now who created that, okay? Because the truth is, most often than not, it's not any one of us in the room right now, right? It's not anyone that is actively doing it right now. We may not have created it, but what we need to acknowledge is that each one of us is in some way perpetuating it, okay? And so once we assume that this is not a lie, that it's true, we can then begin, because if something ain't broke, people don't fix it. And if people don't think that anything is broken, there's not going to be any movement of the needle towards fixing it. So that's one. Then I think being able to have what we talked about, lectures about unconscious bias, talking to medical students from pre-med years to their preclinical years to understand that these things exist so that when they encounter them, they have a better understanding of how to manage them, all right? Then the thing is actually trying to teach people how to manage them. And that is why I said this is not a single one-size-fits-all solution, because there are so many nuanced things that make people different. There are so many different biases that people will have. One person with a disability that is a minority will not have the same story, the same feelings, the same background as somebody else. And so that's why my broken record is going to be, I don't want people to make assumptions about anyone. What you do is you understand that people will have differences. And what you're supposed to do as a physician is you take a history and a physical. You ask open-ended questions. You get to know the person, all right? And if you get to know the person while keeping in the back of your mind that that person may have certain preconceived notions of you, and you may have certain preconceived notions of them, if we are just able to engage an honest, open dialogue, you will be able to eventually get to a point where, because some of these biases and some of the things that happen are based on lack of trust, because of a long-standing history of things that happened to certain minority groups that physicians were doing. And so once we get to a point where people feel as though they can communicate with each other openly, honestly, and effectively, I think it will start to break down some of those barriers, but it's definitely not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to be something that I can guarantee that this is exactly what needs to be done, and I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers to how it needs to be done. But I think summary, we need to acknowledge what's happening. We need to then educate people on the fact that it is happening. And then we need to start to try to create a way on how we can address it and teach it to people without hiding behind it. So I can repeat, if you don't want, Sean, for some of the ones that are far away, I can repeat questions if you want so people don't have to wait. But
Thank you for an excellent talk. Question, I think that a lot of times, a lot of the places that may most need society's help with dealing with people with disabilities are those that, in a very practical economic sense, are the least best equipped to accommodate. What can we do? I mean, I'm sure University of Michigan, Stanford, I've seen their new hospital about a week ago as it's going up. You know, they are building things that probably have the best accommodations at this time. But if you go to places where there are underserved communities, they probably have the least best accommodations. And how do we work to deal with that problem?
So my guess on how that could work well is doing what you said. At first, there may need to be centers. There may need to be places where that gold standard is created, where they do have the resources to be able to implement change. Because not only will that be a place where people can then go, which we do already. We do that for lots of other things. You know that if you want great cardiovascular care, you go to X. If you want to go to the place that's best for, neurologic injuries, you go Y. And so that's what we do already. But if we start to then have that center for excellence for disability care, then that would be the place that is known to do that. What then happens after that is everybody wants to keep up with the Joneses, and then other people are going to try to create. And I'm perfectly fine with keeping up with the Joneses when the Joneses are doing a wonderful job in taking care of people. So I'll repeat it if people can't hear it.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if, as students, we recognize some of these biases and gaps in our education, but are receiving some institutional pushback or lag, how you'd recommend addressing that.
Can anyone hear what she said? I'll repeat it for the camera. So she wonders that as students, if they're recognizing that there are certain gaps in their education, but they're getting sort of pushback from the institution as in general, how do they address that discrepancy, essentially? So I am not, and this is a personal opinion, I am not one for insubordination or things that are going to prevent you from achieving the goals that you want to achieve. I'm being very careful with my words because I think that oftentimes the actions that people take to demonstrate their dissatisfaction with something leads to them not being able to achieve the goal that they want to achieve. And I'm not saying that you need to be an Uncle Tom. I'm not saying that you should not stand up for yourself, but I'm just saying that if you get kicked out of medical school, you're not going to be a doctor. And therefore, if you break the medical school rules, then you're not helping anybody, okay? So that's really just to say, it's possible to, within the constraints of what is allowed right now, one, kick butt and do very well in what you're doing. Because the single most important thing that you can do is to demonstrate that the things that are wrong, and that you are an example to the contrary, okay? Because the more examples we have of people to demonstrate that, yes, I'm a black man and I can be an orthopedic surgeon, not just because I played sports, but because I did well and I matched at Yale, that no one else can take away. No one else can argue about that. Okay? And if we don't have people in leadership positions in those institutions eventually that understand those things, and I don't want to say that you have to look like someone to be able to understand that, all right? There are allies on both sides that understand that there are gaps in some of these things, all right? But I do think that there's an importance in having people that you can emulate that may have had similar backgrounds, whether that background is their race, or that background is their socioeconomic status, whether that background is where they grew up. So there are lots of things that when I say someone that looks like you, it doesn't necessarily mean physically looks like you. But having those people in positions of power will help to change that. And this is going to be a long process to get that done. And so I think the direct answer to that is you need to be a representative of what is right and continue to progress through the steps in that process, so that when you get there, you are one of the voices that can speak up and say, this is wrong. Because if it's the institution that's pushing back, the institution is not a nebulous entity, it's people. There are people that are pushing back, and once there are people that are there that can be allies to you and support you, there will not be as much pushback. Tanner? Okay, yeah, Sean can get you the mic.
Thank you so much for your talk. Hugely inspirational. I counted, I don't know, maybe you guys can double check this, like 13 mess ups. Is that what it was? You going 49 to 52. 49 feet to 52 feet at Stanford. Huge accomplishment. Someone with a track background, I can appreciate that to the nth degree. And to some people, a yard, 3 feet, doesn't really mean a lot. But those 3 feet really make the difference between, as you call it, pedestrian, which I call it superhuman, and going to something where you're all conference, all American, you're all everything. I think that there's 3 feet right now going on. There's the 3 feet gap that we're experiencing right now. And I think that you're doing a great job at Michigan. You mentioned other medical institutions that are trying to make up those 3 feet. What have you found? You mentioned people, and I agree with people, touching people in specific ways so you can create these allies. But for you, on this mission, what has been the thing that's helping move that needle across those 3 feet at those high levels?
That is one of the first times where the person's question was more eloquently stated than the answer is going to be. Like, that was awesome. I feel like I can't follow up your question now with an answer. But thanks, Tanner. So a couple things. One easy answer for me is my faith. So whether you are a believer or not, that is the answer that for me that is honest. I know that the Lord works in mysterious ways and that he has a plan for all of us. And therefore, while this would never have been the path that if I got to choose a choose your own adventure book, which most of you are probably too young to even know what that means now, but we used to have books that were like on paper that we read, not just on your iPads. And you could like choose what thing was going to happen next, and you turn to page 18, and then you say something else, and you turn to page 36. So if this were a choose your own adventure book, I would not have chosen this particular adventure, all right? The spinal cord injury thing, not the coolest thing in the world. So, but I realize that he has a plan. And that has really put me at ease because I know that my steps are already ordered. And that's really what gives me solace. Now, for people that may not necessarily have a faith-based belief system, the other thing is that I feel as though to whom much is given, much is expected. And through my life, I've been given innumerable things that I don't always think that I deserved. And therefore, it's a pay it forward that keeps me pushing. Because I know that the examples that I gave even, I talked about going back home to a house that was modified. People don't always have that luxury. I talked about the fact that I was invited to get back into residency, which is something that people don't get that luxury all the time. And so I realized that for whatever reason, and I have my reason for why I think it's happening, but once again, if there's no faith there, for whatever reason, good things keep on happening in my life. And I feel like there has to be some purpose for why that is happening. And so I keep on getting pushed forward because there are all these gaps, this 3 feet that people keep on finding. And for whatever reason, I have an ability to bridge that gap in different ways that I'm seeing between people of color, between people with disabilities, between lots of different groups that I'm just trying to do my part to move that needle some.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ma'am?
Can I just make a comment because I was struck, by the frustration that one might feel as a student or a faculty member or whatever. I'm a faculty member, and I was just really struck by how important it is, not just to do well and to get there, but to make every moment an opportunity for building relationship with people who have similar beliefs, like everybody here, and Katie and Reza and all of you, everybody who's organized this conference. Meeting the speakers, going to a dinner, showing up. You mentioned this in your speech. Show up. Everybody's working hard, but take something that you believe in and put some energy into it, because what you receive back is so much greater. And even though this is a long journey in medical school, every day you have an opportunity to affect change and to reframe things so that you're having a positive impact. And it will give you that energy and that motivation to continue to work to that level where you actually have some power and a voice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Round of applause one more time. I just want to say a few thank yous here. It's been a real honor this year to work with the committee. We got T-Ray, Shaw, Atlanta, Trinika, Chad, Val, Katie, Ike, Fred, in my office. Minnie was instrumental in putting a lot of work together, and Dr. Stephanie White as well. Thank you team for all your good work. Thank you Miriam Telby for your wonderful work on a second edition poster. And thank you Dr. Evelyn Ellis for your continued support of our good work here in the medical school and your funding through the Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity. We have a small gift for you before you leave. Please give the gift. Which And I just want to thank, again, Tanner, for your call to action, to appreciate differences, to embrace differences. And again, thank you for your wonderful words and inspiration. Thank you both for your ability to keep moving forward despite things, right? So again, miigwech for everyone. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.